Have you ever had that moment when you are in the middle of a conversation, things are going great, and then the words stop flowing? Your brain turns to mush, and you are just standing there like someone hit the pause button on your thoughts. Been there many times. It is the awkward silence we all dread. But here's the thing, it doesn't have to be that way. Today, I'm going to walk you through something that used to give me major anxiety. How to mostly never run out of things to say. Notice I said mostly. Honestly, even the most confident talkers can hit a dead end sometimes. But with these strategies, you will be able to power through those moments and keep conversations going like a pro. And believe me, this is not about learning gimmicky conversation starters or memorizing a bunch of lines. We are talking about real, natural methods that will make you a conversational wizard. Let's dive in. Before I get into the details of techniques, let's start with something very basic, being present in the conversation. Now, I know what you are thinking. What does that even mean? I am present. I'm standing here, right? But hear me out. There's a difference between physically being in a conversation and mentally being there. Sometimes we are so wrapped up in what we are going to say next or worrying about whether we will run out of things to say that we are not actually listening to what the other person is saying. It is like having a conversation on autopilot. I used to do this all the time. My anxiety about awkward silences was so bad that I was constantly planning my next move instead of truly engaging in the moment. And people can feel that. You don't have to be a mind reader to sense when someone has checked out. So step 1 to never running out of things to say. Actually listen. It sounds obvious, but it is a game changer. When you are present and paying attention, your brain will naturally pick up on things you can respond to. You will find that conversations become a lot easier when you are not fighting to think of something to say, because the other person is practically giving you the material. Let me tell you about this one time when I was at a networking event. Now, if you have ever been to one of these things, you know how brutal they can be. You are surrounded by strangers, and everyone is there to make connections, but it can feel super awkward if you don't know what to say. I was talking to this guy who worked in marketing. In my head, I was freaking out because I didn't know much about marketing, and I was sure I would run out of things to talk about. So, instead of planning my escape route, I decided to do something radical. I just listened. I asked him a simple question. What got you into marketing? That is it. And before I knew it, he was off, talking about how he started in graphic design and shifted into marketing because of a project he worked on. Honestly, I barely had to say anything. Just by being present and listening, I was able to keep the conversation going for way longer than I thought possible. He felt heard, and I didn't have to pull conversational rabbits out of a hat. Now, what lesson did it give me? Let the other person's words guide the conversation. If you are fully engaged, there is always something to respond to. The second key to never running out of things to say is curiosity. Imagine conversations as treasure hunts. Every person you talk to has a story, a unique perspective, or an experience that you have never heard before. The trick is to genuinely want to discover what that is. Curiosity is the fuel for the conversation. If you are curious about the other person, you will naturally have questions to ask and things to explore. And the best part is that people love talking about themselves. It is human nature. You don't have to come up with groundbreaking insights or witty comebacks. Just show genuine interest, and the conversation will flow. One time, I was sitting on a flight next to a guy who, at first glance, looked like your average businessman. We exchanged the usual small talk, and I figured it would be a long, quiet flight. But then, my curiosity kicked in. Instead of zoning out with my headphones, I decided to ask him what he did for a living. Turns out, he was a wildlife photographer in his free time, and he had been to some of the most remote places on Earth, capturing animals in their natural habitats. I could have never guessed that from just looking at him. That conversation lasted for the entire flight, and I learned so much about wildlife, photography, and even survival techniques, all because I let my curiosity lead the way. Here's another truth bomb. Silence is not your enemy. I know it sounds crazy, especially when we are talking about how to never run out of things to say. But the reality is, sometimes a pause is exactly what a conversation needs. We rush to fill every single second with words because we are terrified of silence. But silence can actually give a conversation space to breathe. Let's be honest, some of the most awkward moments happen when we are desperately trying to keep the conversation going with meaningless filler. You don't have to do that. A little silence can actually add depth to a conversation. It allows both people to reflect on what has been said and gives the other person room to think. And if you ever do find yourself in an awkward silence, here is a pro tip. Own it. If you make it awkward, it will be awkward. But if you are confident and comfortable with a little pause, the other person will be too. I once had a first date where we hit a lull in conversation. We had been talking nonstop for about an hour, and suddenly we both just stopped. My old self would have freaked out, panicking to think of something, anything to say. But instead I just smiled and said, "You know, it is actually nice to just sit here and not feel the need to fill the silence. It worked like magic. She laughed, relaxed, and we just enjoyed the quiet for a minute. After that, the conversation picked right back up, no awkwardness at all. In fact, the silence made it feel like we didn't need to force anything, which made the rest of the night much more relaxed. Next, stories make you memorable. Everyone loves a good story. If you want to be the kind of person who never runs out of things to say, learn how to tell stories. The key here is to share experiences in a way that is relatable. You don't need to have climbed Mount Everest or saved someone from a burning building. Even small, everyday stories can be interesting if you tell them right. Think about the point of the story, keep it concise, and always tie it back to the conversation. I remember being at a party where I didn't know many people. I ended up chatting with a small group, and we were talking about favorite vacation spots. One guy mentioned that he had just gotten back from a beach trip, and suddenly, the conversation kind of stalled. No one knew where to take it from there. So, I jumped in with a quick story about how I once got sunburned so badly in Mexico that I looked like a lobster for a week. It wasn't a deep or meaningful story, but it was funny and relatable. Suddenly, everyone had something to say, sharing their own sunburn horror stories, talking about vacation disasters, and on it went. A random little story kept the conversation alive. Finally, let's talk about something that a lot of people avoid in conversations: vulnerability. If you really want to connect with someone and keep a conversation flowing, don't be afraid to show a bit of your true self. It is easy to fall into the trap of surface-level talk like, "How's the weather? What do you do for work?" But if you really want to get deeper, share a little bit of your own struggles or challenges. Now, I am not saying you should spill your darkest secrets to someone you just met, but being real and honest about your life can make the other person feel safe to open up too. Vulnerability creates connection. And when you are connected, the conversation almost never runs dry. I used to be really closed off, especially in new conversations. I thought I had to keep everything light and funny. But one time, I was talking to a new coworker, and she mentioned how she was struggling with work-life balance. To keep things at surface level, I would just nod along, but something in me decided to open up a little. I told her about how a few months earlier I had been feeling totally burned out and was seriously considering leaving my job. I didn't go into crazy detail, but I was real about how stressed I had been. And you know what happened? She didn't judge me or think less of me for it. In fact, she started talking more openly about her own challenges, and we had a real conversation. That one moment of vulnerability helped build a connection. It made that conversation flow better and also helped turn a new colleague into a friend. Okay, I know I said this isn't about memorizing lines or tricks, but I would be lying if I didn't tell you that having a few go-to topics in your back pocket can be a lifesaver. Think of these as your conversation lifeboats, the topics you can jump to when things get dry. It could be something that you are genuinely interested in, like travel, food, or movies. You gotta ask open-ended questions that get the other person talking. For example, what is the best vacation you have ever been on? What is the last really good book or movie you watched? If you could have dinner with any 3 people in history, who would they be? These are groundbreaking, reliable, and can take the conversation in a million different directions. One time, I was at a dinner, and there was this uncomfortable silence at the table. No one seemed to know what to talk about, and it was getting awkward. Suddenly, a dude there threw out a question: "What is the weirdest food you have ever eaten?" It was like flipping a switch. In no time, people were sharing stories about bizarre food experiences, from eating crickets in Thailand to trying fried tarantulas in Cambodia. That one simple question sparked a whole new energy at the table, and before anyone knew it, we were deep in conversation, laughing and swapping stories. Remember, conversations are never about being perfect or never messing up. They are about connection. And when you focus on that, you will find that running out of things to say becomes a rare event. Every conversation is a chance to learn something new about the other person, about yourself, or even about the world around you. You don't always have to fill every second with words, but be present and engaged. And when you focus on that, awkward pauses are just pauses, not the end of the world. Thanks for sticking around until the end. If you found this helpful, make sure to give the video a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe for more videos like this one. As always, I'll catch you in the next one.